Hey guys, for those of you looking to listen to something on the weekend, little something extra, I had a very important conversation with Professor Eric Segall yesterday about the very important arguments being made at the Supreme Court on Friday. So I thought it was super relevant. I wanted to share it with you and inflate my download numbers. So thanks for downloading and pressing play. Here is my conversation with Georgia State University Professor of Constitutional Law, Eric Segall, the Legal Eagle. Jingle by Pico.
Bringing knowledge and gloom and a guest house too. He's got a Labrador dog, glad to give you a poo, cause he's the Legal Eagle.
Eric Segall.
Eric Segall.
Yes.
Is this the office of the Legal Eagle? Eric Segall.
This is the office of the Legal Eagle Beagle. I like that better.
Here's why we're talking. We're talking on Friday. Obviously, everybody knows it's been like 1 million people have died of COVID in the U.S. I'm just setting it up here for listeners. But here's SCOTUS blog says, with over 100,000 Americans currently hospitalized for COVID-19 as a result of the highly contagious Omicron variant, the Supreme Court will hear oral argument Friday in 2 sets of challenges to the Biden administration's authority to take action to combat the pandemic. In the first case, the justices will consider the Biden administration's attempt to impose a vaccine or test mandate for workers at large employers. In the second case, they'll consider a vaccine mandate for healthcare workers at facilities that receive federal funding. I am joined by Eric Segall.
Mandate. By the way, sorry, P, guys, I got to jump in.
Go ahead.
Not a mandate. The second case does not involve a mandate. It involves the spending power, and that's a big difference we can discuss in a few minutes.
Okay, so this is barely setting it up, but I think it's important to mention the fact that this was taken, out of the shadow docket and put in front of us. And we heard the arguments today, and people are losing their mind, at least over the arguments, I think, in the first case. So what else do you need? Oh, and apparently the lawyers arguing against the government ability to combat the pandemic had COVID during the argument, at least. Maybe was it 2? It's crazy. Anyway, go ahead.
And Sotomayor also was not there. She was in her office for some, no one knows why. I'm not going to speculate, but so a few preliminary observations first.
Yeah.
I did put this on Twitter, so I apologize to people who saw it. In a very surprising move, Justice Barrett suggested that the real answer to all the legal, political, social, economic, and cultural issues regarding COVID-19 is to make adoption restrictions much less restrictive. So
that's a joke.
That was a surprise. That was kind of a surprise.
Joke.
Everybody. That was her solution to abortion.
You tweeted that, and I go, "That's a joke." Now you've said it here, and I'm saying that I'm accusing you of making it a joke. She did not say any such thing. Did she?
Well, no, she didn't today, but she has in the past. Okay, not about COVID, of course. Yeah, so that was a surprising move. That's called
that
satire.
Did not happen today.
That's SCOTUS satire, in case anybody is wondering. So that Pete, I will not make your listeners drill down into the very arcane, specific statutory details of these 2 cases for 2 reasons. Okay, really for 1 reason, because the Supreme Court won't either, and they don't care. So, right. so let's talk big picture here. Was Justice Breyer, who you know should have retired 2 years ago, Justice Breyer sounded so frustrated because he kept repeating over and over and over and over again. But I don't blame him for this. 750,000 new cases today. Today is what he keeps saying.
Right.
And the reason he's saying that is because these efforts by the federal government, and it's 2 different laws. One involves workplaces of over 100 people, and that regulation is being issued by OSHA, whose responsibility it is, to regulate workplaces, and to which Congress gave emergency power. OSHA wants, all workplaces of over 100 people to either have their workers vaccinated or masked and tested.
Right.
And the idea that Congress could respond to this emergency which changes every week, month, day, you pick. I don't know, but changes all the time.
Right.
And the idea that Congress, all 100 senators and 500 or 600 representatives would debate the best medical, political, economics, that's very important, policy here on an ongoing basis is insane. No legislature could do that, and certainly not ours. So what the Congress decided 50 years ago, which somehow some of the conservative justices, otherwise known as hacks, thought was a point against the government, was 50 years ago. Congress said to OSHA, when there's an emergency, you guys deal with it, which makes sense. Do you want either Ted Cruz or my friend Jamie Raskin, who I think is really smart? Jamie's now famous and all that. He's in the House. Cruz is in the Senate. Do we want them talking medicine, or do we want experts in the administrative branch talking about medicine? Not a close call. And I love Jamie. Anyway, OSHA has the power to do this, and the court is going to say they don't. And it is really frustrating, and I don't know what to tell your listeners other than, who do you want to decide these questions? Justices Kagan and Roberts, or people in the administrative branch who are responsible to Biden, who you can vote out or not reelect or not elect a Democrat next time, and who you can put political pressure on? You cannot put political pressure on Justice Roberts. He doesn't care, and he won't care. Same with Kagan and Sotomayor. We are living through, one more thing. We are living through what history, if the country survives, which, by the way, I wrote a blog post a couple of days ago saying it very well may not. But if our country survives 50 years from now, this will be like a major historical event where over 1 million people eventually will have died. The economy, who knows what's going to happen. Why are judges getting involved, Pete? I don't understand.
Well,
what kind of country does that?
You do understand, I think, because of the following tweet by our friend Elie Mystal, who wrote, and you may have written this a long time before in a book or said it, the Federalist Society has a cottage industry based on hating OSHA because keeping workers safe is antithetical to the conservative project. Yes.
So, what I wrote on, I want to say November 12th or 13th, don't hold me to it, 11th of 2016, right after Trump was elected. What I said is there's going to be a lot of changes and a lot of things, but the number one priority of the Trump administration will be to appoint judges who will take apart the administrative state because employers hate the administrative state, as does the Federalist Society. And I wrote that right after he was elected. And LA, as usual,
capitalists in general do.
Yeah, and LA is exactly right. But you know what, Pete? We could have, not me because I'm not an expert, you could have a debate among experts about the proper balance between government regulation of workplaces and the economy, capitalism, free enterprise, whatever you want to call it. And that's an interesting debate. And I'm not an absolutist on that either way. Where I'm an absolutist is absent clear, irrational action by the political branches, the court should step out of it.
Well, the debate, of course, does and is being had all the time through a movement of organized labor here and around the world. Like those regulations, that debate occurs when labor, who is not usually as powerful, is able to have a say in the conditions of the workplace. And we know where the labor movement is in this country. And it's been weakened, although it seems to be getting a little stronger.
Well, the court has done a great job weakening it. Right. I mean, the court has done
another great.
But but I do want to say, I don't want to hold myself out as someone who has studied that problem enough to make educated statements about the proper balance. I have my intuitions, my biases, and my priors. It's not an issue I have studied.
Fine, but if the answer to your question is, that you screamed, I don't know why they're doing this. This is, the answer. You've written about this is why they're doing this. It is an ideology to destroy government regulations, as you said, the administrative state. And so the arguments that were made, my understanding, I didn't listen to it, and I wouldn't because
I did.
The argument, so the OSHA, the arguments apparently were like ripped from right wing radio
1927 too.
Why were they? How would you characterize the arguments made by the side on this by the
I have to get a little doctrinal here, which I'm trying to avoid. But we don't have.
I'll try to stay focused as I watch the birds in the snow.
Yeah. So years ago, the Supreme Court made up a doctrine. They literally made it up. There's no text. There's no history. Called the Major Questions Doctrine, or sometimes it's called the Great Powers Doctrine, but major questions. And what this doctrine, although it's never really been used a lot, it's been used a few times, says, I hope I'm not bringing anybody to sleep here, is that when Congress delegates power to administrative agencies, if it's going to delegate what, in anybody's subjective opinion, is a great power, it has to delegate with great specificity. In other words, saying to OSHA, handle emergencies in the workplace. If handling emergencies if handling COVID in the workplace is a great power, then Congress has to do more than just say you can handle emergencies. But there is nothing in text or history to support that. Justice Gorsuch has a boner for that doctrine, and he mentioned it like 5 times today. And so I think that is going to come into play here. It probably answers your question. The conservative justices don't want Congress to be able to delegate to the president the power to deal with, quote, major questions, because it's not really a separation of powers between Congress and the president. It's they don't want the federal government doing it at all, which brings us full circle to the Federalist Society, right? And to what you were talking about.
And it's this, isn't it a certain kind of conservative constitutional scholar theory that the executive branch should have little to no power authority to? I mean, isn't that like the Bannon all the way to the Federalist Society?
It depends when. When there's a Republican president, the Federalist Society seems to be really in love with executive power.
Is that right? And they really are that?
Well, you know, when the unitary executive came into being because of the, Bush-Reagan years. I mean, and the unitary executive theory seems to dissipate substantially when there's a Democratic president.
So
Pete, let's cut through it here, okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is not about law. This is about politics. Now, interestingly, so there was 2 issues today.
Yeah.
Can OSHA require employers of more than 100 people to either require vaccines or mask and test? And there were some exceptions to that, by the way, including, first of all, you have to have 100 employees. Second of all, if the job is mostly outside, then you don't have to do it. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's some other exceptions too. Yeah. So it was a carefully thought out rule. It wasn't, that's one case.
It would mean that you don't have to, if you're a small business, a retail outlet with 5 employees in a store or something.
Or 90 employees.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So they're going to strike that down. The con law people on Twitter seem to agree with that. They're going to strike that down. And that's abhorrent. And the American people should rise up and, I don't know, protest outside the courts building for like a year. The second case, though.
Which, just to be clear, when they strike that down, it will prevent businesses with 100 or more employees from instituting.
No. It just they can if they want to, but they don't have to.
But right now they have to under OSHA rules.
I think it was. I don't know what the current. I think they're asking for a stay of that rule. The plaintiffs. So, by the way, none of that should be relevant.
The decision could come within 24 hours potentially.
Well, so there's something called an administrative stay, where, and this is what Breyer was ranting about today, where the court says, we're not telling you how we're going to rule, and it's going to be temporary, but we're going to stay it until we figure it out. To which Breyer responded, but there are 750,000 new cases every day.
Yeah, Alito apparently, again, back to Twitter, I don't know who wrote this, but Alito asking, what's the big deal issuing a stay and stopping OSHA while the court considers complicated issues, from the same fucking guy who wouldn't stay Texas's bounty hunting law against abortion providers.
Right. So that's the point, Pete. And I know your listeners are tired of me saying this, but it's all politics. It's not law. It's all values. It's all second guessing based on what the justices feel like the right result is.
The Supreme Court is a branch of government which can veto the other branches, and it's in the hands of Republican partisan operatives.
Yes, but to new listeners, you know that I politically will agree more often with liberal judges than conservative justices, but I don't think the Supreme Court should act liberally in these situations either. I think the court should almost 98% of the time. Brown versus Board of Education was correct, I think. Obergefell was correct, I think. And then there were a lot of cases involving criminal defendants, perjury, self-incrimination, double jeopardy. Those cases the court should hear. The rest of it, we should vote.
You have always stated consistently that the judicial branch should not have the power it does over the legislative branch.
Or the executive branch or the states, absent what Alexander Hamilton, not Segall, Alexander Hamilton, not the actor on Broadway, not Lin-Miranda, but the actual Alexander Hamilton, what he said in 1787, anticipating objections to the court striking down laws. He said they will only do that. Now, they should only do that when there is, quote, this is his words, an irreconcilable variance between a law and the Constitution. Mm-hmm. What he meant by that was an unequivocally clear error, just like, that's a 29-year-old president or 3 senators from a state or prior restraint under the First Amendment. That kind, as applied to the federal government, that kind of thing. But the court has struck down hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of laws where there was not an irreconcilable variance. So I want to talk about the second case.
And you made the case, of course, best in your award-winning book, Supreme Myths. What are the awards? Well, I don't remember, but I gave them.
Well, the point I want to make about that is I wrote and published that book in 2012 when Obama was president and a liberal court was. Right. It was still a 5-4 Republican court with Kennedy flipping sides, frequently. But everybody anticipated that there might be a liberal court very soon. That's one of the reasons I wrote that book, because I didn't want liberals to use the court the way the conservatives used the court. Except for, I want to be clear, Pete, when it comes to the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments, self-incrimination, double jeopardy, what evidence comes into court, what witnesses are allowed to say, that is the business of the courts. You know why? Because that's the business of the courts.
Okay. Well, there is the Segall doctrine, and we always love it when you define it as radical.
I want to talk about the second case.
As radical as it still is. Go ahead. Second case today
involves it's a rule issued technically, I think, by the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. And what it says is, if you receive federal money, and only if you receive federal money, and you employ healthcare workers, those healthcare workers have to be vaccinated absent a medical or religious exemption. Yeah. Can you think of any rule ever that makes more sense than that?
No, and 2 guys that ran that agency, Mark McClellan and Andy Slavitt, wrote a great piece opinion piece at the Washington Post making the case for it and how obvious it is that they should the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services should be able to handle the workers at their facilities appropriately, the way that they are.
Right. So Justice Neil, I have a boner for the great powers argument, Gorsuch, today, and to some lesser degree, a couple of other conservative justices, treated that as if it were a requirement. In other words, the OSHA thing is a rule. If you don't follow it, you get fined, whatever. This is different. This is, if you don't like this rule, then drop out of the Medicare program, which states can do. I understand it'd be a big burden. No one ever has. This is the same problem we had with NFI, with the Obamacare case. No one has ever required the states to take Medicaid and Medicare money. Mm-hmm. They agreed to do so. And every year, Pete, that I mentioned, every year, they sign a piece of paper that says to get this money from the federal government, we understand that conditions may change and the relevant agencies might impose different conditions on us, and we agree to comply with those conditions.
I do have to say, it cannot. Yes, states take that money, but with the Obamacare Medicaid expansion, many conservative states refused that free money, and as a result, especially in a state like Texas, where so many people
and Georgia and my state,
as a result, millions of people surely suffered and died because they couldn't get appropriate health care because those states didn't take that free money that they were entitled to. Sorry.
And
I just felt like that.
No, you're right. No, you're right. And I'm sure you and Dr. Carroll talked about this. And you know why they didn't take that money? Racism. They just didn't. Racism.
Well, poor people in general.
It was no. They were indifferent. They were indifferent to poor people, which is terrible. But they hated Obama. Period. Full stop. They didn't want anything Obama did to be successful. And this is a different conversation for a different day.
But to be clear, they hate poor people getting any kind of benefit from the government. It's not just that Obama was black. Sure,
I think they're indifferent. I think they're indifferent to poor people, but it's the same thing. I mean,
I don't think they're indifferent to poor people because I've interviewed them. Anti-poverty workers don't think they're indifferent.
Fair enough. By the way, who retweeted me a few times today? Jonathan Cohn of Huffington Post is really one of the best healthcare people. I think
his book last year is the most important book. Speaking of Obamacare, it was amazing. I'm looking forward to my bookcase and trying to remember that.
He's interviewed me a couple of times, and just a few of the more obvious things that this is a medical emergency, and why are judges sticking their heads in where they don't belong, kind of thing. I mean, the second case, I think the court is going to
10-Year War is the name of Jonathan Cohn's amazing book about.
Yeah, and he's a great writer.
Yeah, go ahead.
He's a great writer. So the second case, I think the court is going to actually uphold the Medicare, Medicaid regulations. Now, I could spend the next hour giving you legal reasons why the second case is different than the first. Maybe the second case is easier because it's a spending power case, not a coercive case. In other words, the states do technically have a choice. But I could do that, but we're not going to do that because that's not what's going on. I think what's going on, Pete, and I know I'm going to get criticism for this, but before I say it, can I just draw an analogy? There was a case, say, 7-8 years ago involving the searching of cell phones. And the issue was, do police need a warrant to open when they arrest you for a crime? And it's a legitimate arrest, and they have your cell phone. Do they need a warrant to search the cell phone? And everybody was not sure how the case was going to come out. And Oren Kerr is the leading authority in the country on the Fourth Amendment. And he was saying, it's a close case and all this stuff. I predicted correctly that it would probably be unanimous or almost unanimous, which it was. And they said, no, the police need a warrant to search cell phones. Why did I know that? Because they have cell phones. They understand cell phones. It's in their pockets. The justices know their bank accounts and their tax returns or whatever are in their cell phones. I think these justices kind of have empathy, slightly more empathy for elderly people on Medicare, because all of them are going to be on Medicare, Pete. Every single one of these justices will be on Medicare. So they can relate to that problem more than they can relate to a factory in middle America that employs 300 people and now have, and the rules that apply to them. Now, I may be wrong, but other people on Twitter said the same thing, that they're going to rule against. And then when they rule against the OSHA rule, but rule in favor of the Medicaid, Medicare rule, they're going to pound their chests and go, see, we're not political. We ruled for the Biden administration in one case and we ruled against them in the other case. As if some, I once made a really, the dumbest thing I've ever said. The single dumbest thing I've ever said in my life is not about, what's her name? The person who was never pregnant.
Sarah Palin.
Yeah, that's not you might think that's the dumbest thing I've ever said.
As of right now, I do. Go ahead, though. I'm waiting.
I was right about that. But anyway,
you sounded dumb. Go ahead.
When I was a freshman in college, and I was refereeing a basketball game. I used to love playing. I played a lot of basketball. I was a referee too, and I was refereeing an intramural game. And it was a very hotly contested game, a lot of fouls called. And after the game, one of the coaches of the team came to me and said, "You really refed a shitty game." And I said, and this was dumb. What I said was really stupid. I said, "Why do you say that? I mean, there were roughly the same number of fouls called on each team." To which he correctly responded. I mean, I think I was right in how I refed it, but he correctly responded, "But they committed more fouls than we did," which is a fair response to what I said. For the court to say, as it's going to, see, look at us. We're not partisan. One for the Biden administration, one against the Biden administration. That's bullshit. They should win both easily. I want to put this in the starkest terms possible. we are in a worldwide emergency of health and economics and childcare and schools and death and dying and depression. And I have no idea if the Biden administration is handling it well or not. I would have had no idea if the Trump administration was handling it well or not once it at least admitted to the emergency. When it was denying the emergency, we could all, but I don't know what to do. You don't know when I'm not smart. It's not my job to know what to do. As a constitutional law professor, it's not my job to decide to know what to do about COVID emergencies. It is not Justice Roberts' job either. It just isn't. Absent the most irrational, the most stupid, the obviously unconstitutional. If HHS came out and said tomorrow, if OSHA came out tomorrow and said, this whole vaccine argument is really hurting our country. From now on, if you're an employer of 100 people, you are not allowed to say vaccines don't work.
Right.
Well, I would say that's unconstitutional. That violates the First Amendment. It's obviously a restriction on the freedom of speech, and the court should overturn it.
Right.
That's the kind of thing the court should do, and the only kind of thing.
Right. The speech issue, not a public policy.
Or make different rules for different religions, or different races or whatever. Yeah. I mean,
and you could see that playing out today, apparently, based on the coverage I read of it. I didn't hear it, in that the questions they were asking, for example, apparently, was it Gorsuch? Somebody said the flu kills hundreds of thousands a year. Alito said it. And it doesn't kill hundreds of thousands a year. One year it killed 80,000 people. But the point was, that is a simple idea to understand how much more dangerous and contagious COVID is. And making that comparison and making that point is making your point that they shouldn't be talking.
By the way, my epidemiologist friend, I've told you about before, who's really an expert, tells me, I have no personal knowledge. He tells me, I think it's roughly 35,000 people a year die from the flu, something like that, 30 to 40,000, something like that. Mm-hmm. That's not COVID.
That's, I mean, it's an average. So some years there's more, obviously. Some years there might be less. But I mean, it's not COVID. I think in that it's not COVID. Now I'm becoming the public health expert. It's not nearly as contagious. And I don't know. The point is,
it's more than that, Pete. And I'm not a doctor either, but I don't want to say who, but a law professor who I debate regularly with, and who we disagree but amicably. Mm-hmm. This professor's wife had COVID 7 or 8 months ago, and it went away. Her symptoms were bad but not terrible, except she's had depression, anxiety, and all kinds of terrible things.
I hear it all the time, and
the flu doesn't do that. The flu does not do that.
Right. This is far more dangerous and does long-term damage. It would seem fair to say that we don't know how much, but it clearly does more than the flu. Yes. And the fact that the justices were up there acting like they were, medical experts of any sort.
You know what it reminds me of a little bit? Going back to cell phones, Justice Roberts, very early on in his I want to say 2008, he was appointed in 2006 or 5. Somewhere around 2000, I think it's 2010, actually. There was a case where Pete, I'm not making this up. He did not know the difference between a beeper and a cell phone.
Right. So the idea that they know about technology or anything that comes before the court, the other example would be women's reproductive rights and arguing about the width of a hallway and why, these issues should be left up to doctors and nurses and healthcare experts, but they become political and politicized, and then these justices just act like Fox News hosts.
Well, so that was several times today I really had to tweet that Alito and Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and Barrett, not so much Thomas today, to be fair, and not so much Roberts, but the other 4, they sounded like Sean Hannity. And speaking of Sean Hannity, can we change subjects for 1 second?
Yeah, but there was a tweet that adhered to something like, here it is. Honestly, to argue, I think this is Elie Mystal again. Honestly, to argue effectively in front of the Supreme Court these days, you have to be a regular Fox News watcher because so many of the questions from Republican justices are ripped from their segments.
Yes, but I want you to tell Elie the next time you talk to him that I was the first. Actually, I believe he retweeted this the first time. I was the first person to call him the Fox News 5.
The Fox News 5?
Yes.
Oh.
That was before Barrett. Yes, I was the first person.
I don't even remember you saying that, but
yes, I've been saying that for about 7 years.
Well done. We've got an award for you.
Yeah. It's the Fox News Award.
It's the Fox News 5 Award.
Why? Okay, so for your listeners, I think what's going to happen is the court is going to strike down the OSHA rule. I think the court's going to uphold the Medicaid, Medicare rule. Not sure of either prediction. My personal view and the personal view of anybody who's reasonable should be, these are hard issues. We're in the middle of an emergency, and the judges should let politicians do what politicians do. And if the American people don't like it, they can vote them out. That's my position. So there should be I don't understand why this is not a bigger story. I understand it's gotten some coverage, but apparently on January 6th of 2021, Sean Hannity texted Mark Meadows, Trump's chief of staff, and so first of all, we have a problem right there, but leaving that aside for the moment. And Hannity said in this text message, he was concerned that if Pence were to do what Trump wanted Pence to do, which was basically overturn the election, the entire the entire office of legal counsel at the White House, the entire White House counsel's office, and maybe even DOJ would quit that day. And so you must stop him from doing it. That's Sean Hannity to Mark Meadows, chief of staff. In that text, Pete, he refers to we. We will. In other words, he is including the Trump administration and himself in the pronoun we. Why isn't this a bigger problem? Walter Cronkite, for you youngins out there, was easily America's most trusted newscaster in the history of America. And he was that for decades. If we had phone records of Walter Cronkite talking to President Kennedy about Vietnam War strategy or the Great Society with Lyndon Johnson or whatever, I think there would have been a huge outpouring of what? What are you talking about? He's a journalist. He's not supposed to be talking to the president about, you can interview the president, but you don't. This is Sean Hannity talking to the chief of staff, giving him basically advice on what to do about this insurrection that's occurring.
The issue only becomes, unfortunately, worse because when someone that works at a major corporate news quote or media outlet does such a thing, they should be held to a standard. The way CNN finally did with Chris Cuomo, connecting, that was a lot of people were making that comparison.
That was terrible. He should have been fired.
Right. And everybody made that comparison about what you're saying about Hannity. Like CNN fired Chris Cuomo because he texted his fucking brother, by the way. It's a little bit more understandable. It was his brother.
Right.
In this case, Hannity did far worse with the president of the United States. Fox News should immediately bench him and fire him, of course. But the point
that isn't the big issue, though. But that isn't the big issue. I agree with you 100%.
Well, all I'm saying is the way that it plays out is this giant media company is not going to do that and have that standard. And even if they did, these people will leave and create their own individual thing, frankly, the way I have. But they will have so much, like Rogan, so much power and influence. It would seem to be the same outcome because they can threaten the president. If you do this or you don't do this, I'm going to command my audience to fucking show up at your house.
But yes, all that is true. And my point is how connected the Trump administration was to Fox News.
The whole 4 years.
Yes, the whole 4 years.
Hannity,
but this is proof. But Pete, now we have proof, 100% proof.
All of them, and you could argue probably many in liberal media as well, coronated the man. And then he paid tribute to them. I always thought of Donald Trump always making his decisions based on what the TV people were telling him. Right. He was always a TV guy. It wasn't like he was talking to the conservative columnists. He was just looking at how it would play on TV. So if they told him to do this, they told him to do that. He took their cues. See, that's how he played. So all of those guys, Hannity is just one of many others, had a tremendous influence on Donald Trump's decisions.
And then going full,
and not the scientists and not the generals, but fucking Mark Levin.
Right. And then going full circle today, Justice Thomas did make one comment today that suggested, you're not going to believe me when I tell you this, and I'll have to read the transcript to get it exactly right. But he basically said, well, but vaccines have side effects too, and it hurts some people, and somehow that's relevant.
Oh, no. And was it Thomas who said that?
Yep. At some point. Yep. The others might have, but Thomas definitely.
I read that, I think something like Alito said, I'm not questioning the effectiveness of the vaccines, but they could have some side effects, right?
No, Thomas made a bigger point of it, and I'm pretty sure I'm doing it in real time, so but I'm 98% sure, which is clearly a Fox News talking point. I want to mention that Laura Ingraham at 10 o'clock on Fox News was a former Thomas clerk. When Fox News gave her the 10 o'clock time slot, he was her first guest, either her first guest or on her first or second show. Gave her a very long interview. Justice Thomas's wife obviously is in bed with Fox News. There is no question in my mind that Justice Thomas is in bed with Fox News as well. No question at all. And because we can't fire Justice Thomas, that should be a very disturbing thing.
So, you're making a point. Not only does the President of the United States have a direct connection to influential right-wing ratings-based media, but so does at least one judge. Yeah.
I'm not saying that Laura Ingraham shouldn't be disqualified from having a news show because she was Justice Thomas's law clerk. What I am saying is that if she were a true journalist, which she's not, obviously, she would be very careful about how she reports about the court, given her close connection to Justice Thomas.
Corporate media outlets should not allow fascists to have platforms, but that's
that too. That's that too. I don't disagree
fascist, with that promoting fascism. That's what they're doing.
I don't. And then finally, my last point of the day, which I actually did on TikTok about 2 minutes before you called, but I'm not sure I published it yet, is this. And I'm sorry, this is going to bore everybody. Once again, Pete, the arguments today affect tens, 20s, 50s of million Americans. Whether this workplace requirement goes into effect or not, is whether you agree with it or not, is a major issue in this country. And if you're opposed to it, that's fine. That's democracy is for. You speak up, you vote, you're against it, whatever. It should be on freaking TV. You would have watched it had it been on TV, right? You would have. If it had been on TV, you would have watched it. Yes?
Yes. I would have at least, I would definitely have watched the clips for sure. I'm not saying that I would have sat here in the shed and watched the whole thing. But.
Right. Well, you would have turned it on at some point, is my guess.
I would have watched, yes. I would have watched it. Yeah. I watched those important.
And again, now this is COVID, so it's different, But in normal times, members of the public get to go in and watch the arguments, about 250 of them. C-SPAN is willing to televise them at no cost to the court or the government. It is an open government public hearing where members of the public are invited, albeit you have to stand in line all night and it's 250 people. There is no reason it shouldn't be on TV.
Well,
and
there
you know
are
what?
reasons, and you're not presenting them.
No, there aren't.
There are arguments that the judges would be performing a lot more for the campaign.
Then if that's who they are, and we should know. By the way, people in India should be watching these arguments. People in Russia,
right? Because
it's
yeah.
And by the way, the argument you just made that the justices who act out more, Justice Kennedy, God damn it, can I curse like fuck?
Oh wow,
Justice Kennedy,
get it out of your system.
Justice Kennedy in front of Congress like 5 years ago, when every year 2 justices have to go and talk about the budget. Every year, 2 of them go to talk about the budget. And that year was Breyer and Kennedy. And when asked about cameras, Kennedy said, yeah, my colleagues might misbehave. 2 things wrong with that. One, that's their problem, not the American people's problem. But more importantly, Pete, the reverse is true. If, in fact, they know they're being watched by the whole world, they will behave better. They will. That's just how it's going to be.
You've gotten the entire Segall doctrine out during today's conversation. Lifetime tenure, televising the hearings.
The Fox News 5. The Fox 6.
Right. Yeah. Well done, sir. Yeah. I got to say now,
thank you.
Just address one thing before you go. Yes. On my Facebook post, which Facebook post was it? Oh, the word BJs was mentioned. About
no. I don't want to go there.
Well, you went there publicly on Facebook.
I know I shouldn't have done it, but I did. But I have more information for you if you want.
All right. Well, Just have to edit that.
You had a guest. No, I'll do it. You had a guest on who mentioned something about
Dr. Kaplan saw my electric fireplace and made fun of it and said, "Where'd you get that? At BJ's Special?"
BJ's Wholesale Club, right. I think is what it's called. Okay, so my dad started that store, and I asked him the other day how he got the name BJ's, because it seems like an odd name. To which my dad responded that the person who he appointed to run those stores had a daughter whose nickname was BJ. And my dad, who's a retailer at heart, thought that, this is really boring, but thought that having letters in a store's name is very effective. My dad also was involved with TJ Maxx and basically got TJ Maxx off the ground.
Wow. Well, did your dad... He's the only person we at least know publicly to blame. Was the name Rim Job taken?
Somebody on your Facebook feed mentioned that the fact that my dad started BJ's Wholesale Club is an explanation for why I have a guest house. I did not take the opportunity to say I don't have a guest house.
Yeah, but
I've never had a guest house.
But the obvious,
I have no guest house. There's no guest house on my property.
You should never acknowledge that argument because you're so effective at arguing. You know that it's a loss. When I always say the same thing, show us Google Maps.
It's a shed. You have a shed.
It has 2 floors and plumbing and electric.
It does not have 2 floors. It does not have 2 floors.
It has a kitchen. It has a kitchen. I've been in it, and there's a kitchen in it.
It has an unworkable kitchen. And it has 7 roofs because of termites. And by the way, it will be torn down in the next 6 months.
And if you don't let us do a bit about like that structure, then you're no longer invited on the show. But the question though does remain. You've talked about your dad who's what, 90 what? He's still with us.
He's 92. We're playing bridge together at 4:00.
Play virtual bridge. He's in Massachusetts, right? Yeah. And you have talked about his success as a businessman, as an executive at many companies that people know. He must be worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
No.
He must be worth millions and millions of dollars. He's
a wealthy man. I can see. He's a wealthy. I come from a wealthy family. I'm very blessed. I'm very lucky in that way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is this how we're going to end this podcast?
No, I have to ask you for $10,000. I desperately need a new car.
Okay, so here's a story for you.
I desperately need a new car. I can't wait till the market.
This should end this podcast. I had a girlfriend for 2 years in college and 2 years in law school.
Was her name BJ?
Her name was not BJ. She was basically the devil in disguise. It was a horrific relationship. And her mother could not have been worse. She was from Buffalo, New York. And when her mother found out at the time, and my dad was at American Express. Mm-hmm. And when she found that out, her mom's from Buffalo, which older listeners will remember to be Jack Kemp country, very conservative. Mm-hmm. And we were at dinner. She took my girlfriend and I out for dinner at a very fancy restaurant. And unfortunately, she brought up politics, which I did not want to do because I knew she was conservative. And
how old were you?
I gave her, 20 years old. And I made some liberal and progressive comments. And she looked at me and said right to my face, "You're just guilty about your big daddy's money." That's what she said. And I said, I looked at my girlfriend, I looked at her, and I said, "You've known me for 30 minutes and don't really know anything about me." How's that for a story? It's true, 100%. Not only was my girlfriend a devil, but her mother was too. Her father, by the way, when I went to Buffalo that summer to visit them in Buffalo, he began dinner. He owned a scale store in Amherst, New York, commercial scales, and he said to me, "I had a great day today, except for one person who tried to Jew me down." That's what he said. Mm-hmm. He thought I was Jewish. I mean, I'm not Jewish, as you know, but he thought I was Jewish. And they were a lovely couple. And I don't know why we got on this tangent. And you can edit all that out if you want.
No, I don't want to edit any of that. That was amazing. But I mean, I want to know what happened next after you said you know me 30 minutes and you would say such a thing. I mean, I thought you were going to say you got up and left.
what happened is my girlfriend changed the subject to movies because her mother was in fact a movie. She knows I love movies. Was a movie critic. Was a movie critic on a local Buffalo television station.
Holy old pivot. Big Daddy's money is. Sadly, this audience is pretty ruthless, as you know, and I do fear that if I do let this stand, that phrase is going to be revisited in several places, including social media, to you anytime.
Well, I am proud of my father, and who, by the way, was a Marxist in college. I am proud of my father, and I think I made my own way in this world, so I don't feel defensive about it.
Right, but it is weird that
except for my fake guest house, which I do feel defensive.
Isn't it weird though that he insists that you refer to him as Big Daddy to this day? only when he trumps my Trump. Only when you guys are watching Tennessee Williams.
That's funny.
The Cat on a Hot Tin Roof reference.
Yes. Have I mentioned, to bring this to a close, that in no sane civilization in the history of time would we delegate to judges medical and business policies?
I think it's a good place to end. I think it's a good place to end. Yes, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, Eric Segall, thank you.
Thank you, my friend.
All right, there is your weekend special, extra content. Eric Segall, thank him at eSpinSegall on Twitter, and consider a paid subscription if you listen to today's show and aren't already a paid subscriber. Maybe you can edit your pledge upwards if you're listening to a lot of the content and think it's worth it to you. All of us here at Stand Up, and by all of us, I guess I mean my fake producer Keith and my dog Indy, appreciate you listening to today's weekend content. Tell your friends. Why am I still talking? It's the weekend. And I hope you enjoy yours. Bye-bye.